Go inside the Crimson Tide with your hosts Rodney Orr and Gary Harris, keeping you informed on everything Alabama. Tider Insider TV, brought to you by Tuscaloosa Tourism and Sports.
And good evening, everybody, and welcome in to another edition of Tider Insider TV. As you heard, it's brought to you by Tuscaloosa Tourism and Sports, and we love the Tuscaloosa Tourism and Sports tumblers that Don Staley and the crew have given us to have out here on the set. Alongside Rodney Orr from TiderInsider.com, I'm WVOA 23 Sports Director Gary Harris. And Rod, Alabama football played host to Tennessee this past Saturday night, and despite a slow start, Alabama wound up winning this game comfortably as they pulled away in the fourth quarter. The Crimson Tide takes it 52-24, but it was not easy. It was a grind, in fact. Alabama actually trailed by the score 14-7 after the first quarter. That's the first time they've trailed by 7 or more at home after the first quarter since 2012. How about that? So the Crimson Tide made some mistakes again, Rod. That's something that has plagued this team in terms of getting away from teams. But, you know, mistakes aside, Alabama had 574 yards to 346. They ran 92 plays to 54. Time of possession, 40 minutes, 26 seconds to 19:34. 15 of 20 for Alabama on third down, 2 of 13 for Tennessee, and 203 rushing yards to 64. So if you just heard those stats right there, you would think this was a blowout from the start. But as I said, Rod, that wasn't the case because Alabama had things like, and we'll talk more about this when we get to our bad segment in just a moment, but, you know, roughing the punter, getting a punt blocked, fumbling inside the 10, dropping passes, not being ready to go at the snap on defense. So some things that allowed Tennessee to hang around in this game.
You know, I give Tennessee credit, Gary. I thought they played with a lot of spirit, but at the same time, I'm really kind of amazed when people watch this game that they talk about Tennessee maybe was the better team for a period of time, maybe even into the third or fourth quarter. I mean, it was clear. This was all about Alabama. Alabama was the dominant team in this game. There's no question about it. You outlined the statistics there. Those are dominant stats. It was the Alabama mistakes that kept Tennessee in this game. And again, I give credit to Tennessee. They played hard, but this Alabama team continues to make mistakes, keep other teams in the game. But, you know, those are things that in this bye week they're certainly going to work to get cleaned up.
Individually, Bryce, 31 of 43, 371, 2 TDs, no picks. He also ran the ball in this game, rushing for 42 yards and 2 touchdowns. Brian Robinson, a $107, 3 touchdowns. Jamison Williams, 6 catches for 123 yards. Defensively, Jalen Armour-Davis with a big interception of Hendon Hooker. Will Anderson, 1.5 sacks. Christian Harris, Phil Mathis with a half sack as well. So Alabama gets it done. 15 consecutive wins now against the Vols. Did you ever think, Ron, even when Coach Bryant was winning 11 in a row?
No.
No. I mean, that was unfathomable just, 15 years ago. All right, for more on the matchup, here's what wide receiver John Mechie had to say about Alabama's offense following that big win.
Extremely. Not just us three, but everybody on the offense, our tight ends, our running backs, our quarterback. Extremely contagious, just having playmakers all over, and it keeps, it just shows to how dynamic our offense can be when we're all hitting on all cylinders.
All right, Rod, we've already run down a lot of the good and the bad, but let's focus on something I think is very good. Not that you want him running the ball all the time. You do not want Bryce Young taking hits. But we have said sometimes he's going to have to pull it down and run it. He did that. And the thing about him that I noticed, he's got great vision when he's scanning the field and finding receivers under pressure. That also helps him running. He can avoid defenders. It's almost like he sees what's going to happen before it happens, so that he is very shifty, very quick feet, and is able to pick up yards and, for the most part, avoid the hits.
Yep, that's right. I mean, this guy has got it all when you talk about the package, Gary. And now with him using those feet, look, this sends another message to all the future opponents with Bryce Young. You're going to have to defend him a little bit differently. You're going to have to be very I think Tennessee, Gary, and again, they started spying him a little bit more with number 33 in this game after he was running it so effectively. But it adds an incredible element to the Alabama offense with his ability to run the football. And listen, we talk about he threw for 371 yards. He had a couple of touchdown throws. He had 2 touchdowns rushing. Incredible performance by him. But also you mentioned the rushing of Brian Robinson, over 100 yards. 2 receivers, over 100 yards. So this offense is really coming together with those playmakers.
Yeah, Rodney, I want you to talk more about Brian Robinson. I mean, this is why he came back. He's got 13 touchdowns. He's got close to 900 all-purpose yards. He is making the most of this opportunity to be the feature back. And as a guy that, you know, we were nervous about who would step up with Najee Harris leaving. He knew there was some young, talented backs, but it's really been Brian Robinson has taken over and has had an outstanding season.
He's had to. With Jace McClellan going down, you know, Jace was really certainly a big contributor in those early games with his ability to, as a receiver and as a runner as well, obviously. And, you know, Brian's taking on more of the load. And Brian's one of those guys, Gary, and we've talked about these kind of players. You know, Derrick Henry's obviously like that. And Najee was like this. They have to get their carries. They're volume runners, as you like to refer to them. He's got to get his touches for him to be really effective. And look at this reception against Mississippi State for the touchdown. That's another area where Brian's really improved. And, you know, Coach Saban talked about they were really trying to get Brian to make people miss a little bit more effectively. He's really developed a nice jump cut where he avoids a lot of tackles. So Brian Robinson really running the ball well, and I think Roydell Williams continues to progress as well.
All right, let's get back to Tennessee. We touched on some of the bad, but even though Alabama wound up winning this game by 28, it was a 7-point game early in the fourth quarter, and there were mistakes. Let's start with the defense. I thought 75-80% of the game they played really well. We talked about it. They held Tennessee to 2 of 13. They got a bunch of 3 and outs, 64 yards on the ground, but we saw too much of this. We saw too many big plays in the passing game where Alabama either messed up in coverage, got flat out beat, or just wasn't paying attention.
Yeah, I think the communication is still something that they're having to work on, Gary, to make sure everyone, you know, hears the call. Make sure you're on the same page. I think that those things, but once they settled down in the first half, after that first quarter, Hooker threw for 144 yards in the first quarter, and it looked like he was headed for a huge night. He did have a good night, but he only threw for 35 in the second quarter, really slowed down this Tennessee offense. Now, they got that late throw, that late touchdown. When Josh Jobe wasn't prepared, he was looking in another direction for the call, and they quick snapped him, and they made the play. Tennessee did the big play. And there you see Jamison Williams. That's another one of those turnovers. I'm telling you, Gary, this game could have easily turned into a 62-10 type game.
Also, we always hear coaches say it, you got to be solid in the kicking game. And Alabama has one of the best kicking games in the country. But the other night, there were issues. They get a roughing the punter on 4th and 23. Tennessee came back out and scored. They got a punt block that led to a field goal. Reichert, who has been so good, mishit a 54-yard field goal attempt that was way short. Just some things that we haven't seen that you certainly want to clean up going forward in the kicking game.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was maybe their worst performance overall when you talk about the phases that they had, you know, kicks blocked, running into the kicker. And, you know, here's the thing about when you run into the punter, Gary. Alabama had just stopped Tennessee. It was a great defensive effort. Would have been a 3 and out. Instead, Tennessee, and it was a 4th and 23. Mm-hmm. So they get a first down. 2 plays later, they score. Yeah. I mean, that's a huge difference.
Yeah, and that's tough on the defense. Not to make any excuses, but you just hold them. You got 4th and 23. You just sit down over on the bench, and then you got to run back out there. That's why you know, good football teams don't rough the punter on 4th and 23. That's something Alabama has got to get fixed going forward. All right, it's time now for Coach Talk. After 7 games in 7 weeks, actually it's 8 games in 8 weeks now. It was 7 games after last week. They played 8 games in 8 weeks, and they get to the bye. And Coach Saban says following the bye, they need to, during this bye, they need to get some things corrected. And when they come back out for that final 4-game stretch, they've got to take care of business.
We need to get some rest. We need to recover. But we also need to focus on what we need to do to finish the season, and getting some of these things corrected is obviously the thing that we want to focus. But I'm not going to be negative about the game. I'm not going to be negative about our team. I'm really positive about the way they went out there and kept competing in the game. And even though everything wasn't perfect, we made the plays that we need to make to win the game.
All right, Rod, real quick thought before we go to the break. Nobody is happy that Alabama lost to Texas A&M. You'd rather be 8-0. But the truth of the matter is you played this 8 games and 8-week stretch to get to where you're at. You're 7-1. You control your own destiny. You're number 3 in the AP poll. You're going to be in the top 4 if you beat LSU when the playoff rankings come out. Bottom line is it's all right there for you. You win these next 4 games, you go to Atlanta to play Georgia for the SEC championship, probably Georgia, and a spot in the college football playoff. That's all you can ask for.
Yeah, I think right now, Gary, this team is focused on 1 game at a time. First of all, it's this bye week. because I think they have a great opportunity to go back after 8 weeks. This is a long time. So they're at a point now where they needed a break physically, mentally, and all of these things. So I think this comes at a really good time. Now they can clean up some of those things, move forward against LSU, take it one at a time.
All right, still to come on Tider Insider Television. We'll go into more details about what we feel Alabama needs in this final stretch run for the regular season. Stick around to see what kind of first impression the Crimson Tide basketball team made in its exhibition game against Louisiana. That's coming up. Plus, we'll be getting to your phone calls, emails, and tweets. The phone number is always 205-348-WVUA. That's 348-9882. There's the email address, and you can also tweet at us using that hashtag TITV. We'll be right back with the only show that takes you inside the Crimson Tide. The one and only Tider Insider TV will return right after this. And welcome back to TITV, brought to you by Tuscaloosa Tourism and Sports. He's Rodney Orr, I'm Gary Harris, and I know you know who you are. Well, after the bye, Alabama will face LSU, New Mexico State, and Arkansas at home, and then it's the trip to Auburn, Jordan-Hare Stadium for the Iron Bowl. Now, after the win over Tennessee, Alabama heads into its bye week, and really it couldn't come at a more perfect time. 8 weeks in a row, as we talked about, it's a tough stretch. Now they get to rest up a little bit and get ready for these Final Four. Alabama certainly had an interesting first half of the season. They beat 3 teams that at the time they played them were in the top 15 in the country. But they also lost after 100 consecutive victories against unranked teams to A&M, who was unranked at that time, snapping that streak. They had their 19-game winning streak snapped. Nick Saban lost to a former assistant, Jimbo Fisher, for the first time in his coaching career. So there were some negatives. But, Rodney, again, I like what Coach Saban said after the game Saturday night. Hey, we just beat Tennessee. I'm going to focus on the positive. This team is talented enough. They're right there where they need to be. Now, they got to go out and get it done. But I'm telling you what, Rod, this team is good enough, in my opinion, to get in the playoff and play for another national championship.
Well, quite possibly. Again, I think there's obviously a lot of improvement that's been made. I thought the defense played extremely well against Tennessee. Look, this was an offense, Tennessee, that was averaging 250 yards a game rushing. This Alabama defense held them to 64 yards on the ground. Hendon Hooker, he's an extremely talented quarterback. He's a guy that really has turned this Tennessee offense around after replacing Joe Milton early in the year, Gary. So, again, I think this was a very impressive performance. Other than those few mental breakdowns that they had, the communication breakdowns that they had on the defensive side when they gave up some big plays, obviously in the special teams, those things have to be cleaned up. But, yeah, I mean, I think this team certainly, the potential, the ceiling on this team is really high, I think. But this is the time now with this bye week to really regather themselves, find out where they need to improve, make some of those improvements, and, get healthy. Because, look, I think if you get Drew Sanders back for the LSU game, he's a guy that's going to make a lot of difference. Not that Dallas Turner and some of those other players filling in for him haven't done well, but when you bring a player of his magnitude back, you put him on that defensive front, I think that's certainly going to be very helpful.
Yeah, and if you're going to focus on the positives, I know a lot of people have dwelled on the negatives, but this was a team that went into the swamp and won. They won at Mississippi State by 40 points. They blew out Ole Miss, a team that people are talking about could still get into the playoff. Yes, they lost to A&M, at A&M, but A&M is going to turn out to be a really good football team, I think, and is already turning out to do so. And they beat Tennessee by 28. This is still a team that does things that most teams in this conference don't do. I mean, I'll be shocked if anybody else goes to Starkville and wins by 40. I just will. So this team, the ceiling is way up here. All right, let's say Alabama's right here. But if they reach that ceiling, they can get this thing done. I do think it's important, Rodney, and nobody's better at keeping a team focused than Nick Saban, that you don't worry about the potential for the SEC championship game and what lies ahead. You just focus on these next 4 games one at a time, right?
Look, I think this team understands they've got a lot of improvement to make. I think in certain ways probably they were embarrassed with some of their performance against Tennessee, maybe. I think it certainly is, if you want to say it got their attention, I think it certainly did. They finished strong. That's the key. They finished strong. This is a little bit different. We've seen games where they've had big leads and then they didn't finish strong. This time they squandered around early and they finished strong. So it kind of reversed itself in that. So you always want to see that, when they finish strong, when they had their backs to the wall. But, I look at this team, Gary, and again, I think the key is one at a time.
All right, let's get to some hoops. And Alabama basketball is right around the corner. This past Friday night, they had the Tide tip-off at Foster Auditorium along with the women's team. The event was awesome. Consisted of a three-point contest, a skills competition, and a dunk contest. As I said, it was at Foster Auditorium, and the crowd was ready to go. It was raucous. It was packed. And then 2 days later on Sunday, Alabama hosted the Louisiana Raging Cajuns for a charity exhibition game. Now, they only won that game 73-68, but they did not play with Juwan Gary or Quinterly, both of who had to sit that one out. Alabama will open the regular season November 9th against Louisiana Tech, while the women's team will also be at home on November 9th as they will host Charleston Southern. Rodney, just a quick thought on this Alabama men's basketball team. Nate Oates, you know, like Nick Saban did when he came here. Nate Oates is quickly, he's raised the bar. Last year they won the SEC regular season, the tournament championship, they're number 2 overall seed. They get to Sweet 16. They're an overtime away from going to the Elite 8. Now you lose a lot of players, but the expectations have not gone down, and I think that's the way Nate Oates likes it. I think hey, we got good athletes. We can come back and be good again.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, he's recruited extremely well. He's trying to take this program to another level. That means consistency. You got to the Sweet 16. Now what are you going to do as a follow-up? And again, I understand you've got a lot of key players that you have to replace, but that's why you recruit really well, and you know, he's obviously done that.
Yeah, and they're very athletic. May take a little time to gel, but they're athletic. All right, coming up, more Tider Insider TV right here from Tuscaloosa. You stay with us. We're going to get to your phone calls, emails, and tweets. The phone number again, 205-348-9882. Go ahead and call in now. We want to hear from you next. All right, Tider Insider TV with Rodney Orr. I'm Gary Harris. Let's get to your phone calls and do it quickly because we are moving right along. Rick is with us in Regent Forest. Hey, Rick. Rick, go ahead. All right, Rick, for some reason, your phone is distorted. What does Alabama have to do to be competitive against Georgia? Well, I think it's important, as I said earlier, that they get to that game. And, you know, Georgia's got to get there, too. Still some work for both these teams. I'll say this, Rick. In my opinion, all they have to do is be Alabama. I don't think they got to do anything special. I got a lot of respect for Georgia. Rodney, I know you do too. Their defense is really, really good. But, I mean, Georgia's the team struggling to beat Alabama in recent history. Georgia's the team struggling to win a national championship. It's not the other way around. I think if Alabama gets there and Alabama plays solid and mistake-free, they'll have a chance to win the game.
Yeah. You know, I think really Georgia's strength is obviously the line of scrimmage. You look at their offensive line, it's pretty good. They run the ball with a lot of physicality, as they like to say. Their defensive line's been dominant. You know, Jordan Davis, Jalen Carter, you know, Devontae Wyatt. These guys are real difference makers up front defensively. And I think, you know, the key is, you know, if that matchup were to occur, how does Alabama's offensive line deal with the Georgia defensive front? They've got some good pass rushers, obviously very talented. But here's one thing too, Gary. Georgia hasn't been challenged by an offense that can throw the football like Alabama can. And I think by the time, if that game were to materialize, Alabama's running game is really starting to come into play. Obviously, Brian Robinson's maturing, developing every single game. You know, these receivers, Bryce Young, will have a lot more season under their belt. So I think it'd be really interesting to see that game. Yeah,
and let's remember this too. Georgia, as good as they are defensively, they're still not an offense that's equipped to play from behind. They haven't had to. If they get behind 10, 13, 14 points, it'll be interesting to see what their offense can do. We saw last year in Tuscaloosa, they got behind, they couldn't come back. All right, we'll get to a break. We'll come back with more phone calls and emails right after this. All right, let's get back to our phone callers. Rich is with us over in Birmingham. Hey, Rich, welcome into TITV.
You guys remember I told you that Tennessee had hit harder than any team we played.
Well, they got after it. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, I don't think A&M got to Alabama like that.
I don't think they did either, Reg. And I'll tell you this, that Tennessee, it's important to them. They want to get back and get competitive. But I'll say this. I mean, I like the way Alabama responded in that fourth quarter. You know, they wore them down and, you know, 15 in a row and you win it by 28, and a lot of people are complaining. I'm not saying you are, but a lot of Alabama fans are complaining about the performance. Your program's in pretty good shape when you're complaining about beating Tennessee 15 times in a row by 28, right? All right, Reg, we thank you for the phone call. Let's get to an email. And see what we have on the email for us here. This is from June in Tuscaloosa. When will Drew Sanders be back healthy enough to play in a game? Right, you got an update on Drew Sanders?
We kind of mentioned that a little bit earlier. I think hopefully by LSU, Gary, you know, it looks like there's a chance that could happen, good chance. So I think that would be really big.
All right, another email. This comes to us from Mountain Brook, and it is from Troy. Wants to know, why won't Saban play Paul Tyson late in games? We've gotten this before, and I'll say this. You know, Bryce Young's still learning. I'm with you. I would like to see Paul Tyson get into some of these games and get some opportunities to play a few snaps. So in case, you know, there is something that happens, Bryce, he's ready to go. I guess it's just been a situation where Coach Saban hasn't felt comfortable enough to get him in, other than right at, you know, garbage time in a couple of games.
Yeah, and again, he has been in. Came in this game with probably, 2 or 3 minutes left, Alabama's last possession, Gary. And, you know, again, Tennessee had a possession there that took up a little bit of time. So perhaps had they gotten the ball back sooner, maybe he would have gotten a little more work in this game at the end. But I think it might have been just how this game unfolded.
I'll tell you this, so Paul Tyson's a smart young man. He knows the offense. If he's called on, he'll be ready. I can guarantee you that. It's in the bloodlines, that's for sure. All right, thanks for the phone calls and emails. We're going to come back and wrap up this edition of TITV right after this. Well, I already showed you some of the Tide tip-off event earlier in the show, and there are all those skills competitions, but you know what really gets people going is the slam dunk contest, and it created the biggest fan reaction. Watch J.D. Davison right here. Through the legs, and he throws it down. That got a perfect score, but he would miss a later dunk, and that opened the door for Keon Ellis. Over the 7-footer, Charles Bediako, he wins the dunk championship. I told you, these guys got some mad athletic skills on that Alabama basketball team. Can't wait for the season to be here. All right, that's going to do it for TITV. If you missed any of the program, you can catch a replay tonight at 10:30 on WVUA 23, or find it anytime at WVUA23.com. It's also linked at TiderInsider.com. All right, for Rodney Orr, I'm Gary Harris. And remember, next week we're back in game week mode as we'll preview the LSU game and also have our predictions for Alabama and LSU. We're going to leave you with the Tide fans celebrating following the win over Tennessee, the 15th in a row on Saturday night.